Here's Ro Khanna. We were talking about this UAW strike. Here's Ro Khanna explaining why Medicare for All is, how it empowers workers. And ultimately, you know, look, again, like that Recht interview, they destroyed their own business model. They weren't aware of it, that they were doing that, but they destroyed their own business model to disempower unions, to disempower labor. And so much so that their competitors did the opposite. And so ultimately, while Medicare for All will enhance labor, it's also bound to enhance business in some fashion, because they're not going to have to deal with this. You're not going to have to be running a separate company that is with an entire skill set that has nothing to do with what you're doing.
I want to talk to you about this auto worker strike in Detroit in the context of health care, in the context of your candidate, Bernie Sanders, because he says that under Medicare for All, companies that negotiate health care with union workers would have to pass on any savings to those workers that they might receive after all Americans shift over to the Medicare for All coverage, because these workers would be shifting largely from Cadillac private plans to Medicare for All. But I wonder, looking at these auto workers, we know that discussions are very tense today. They don't have a whole lot of faith that their employer is going to do things their way or is going to stand by them as they should. Do you see how maybe they personally might be skeptical that their employer is not going to do this in any way other than kicking and screaming?
I do, but here's the sad thing, Brianna. These auto workers shouldn't be having to fight for basic health care. What they should be fighting for is increased wages. And the reality is unions have had to scrape just to get health care coverage. What Senator Sanders is saying is we're going to make sure everyone has health care coverage so unions can work on getting better pay and better working conditions. And we're going to force the employers to honor the agreement with the unions and compensate them for the extra health care benefits that they may have negotiated in the past.
I mean, it's a fairly easy dynamic to understand. If we had scarcity for, let's say, like milk and cheese and eggs in this country, and it was inaccessible to people for whatever reason, you'd see employers who have the ability to secure that stuff say like, oh, well, so much for wages, but you're going to get milk and cheese. I mean,
also,
it's a simple dynamic.
A Cadillac plan. I just want to reiterate that. And there are plenty of things that it does not cover.
Right. I mean, it's even once you have that, it's incredibly expensive.
Like, I'm still getting bills and phone calls from the NYU Langone Center from this cancer scare that I had last year.
My kids go through that too. And it is, I keep getting bills for like $13 that then end up like metastasizing because you got to pay each one. It's just like a second business. It's nuts. Meanwhile,
it's a racket.
Here is Sarah Nelson, who is the flight attendants union chief. We interviewed her at Netroots Nation this past year. Also, you can go back and hear an interview I did with her on Ring of Fire. It was the flight attendants who basically dropped the hammer during the government shutdown and told Mitch McConnell, you better start up you better start up the government again because otherwise you're going to find it impossible to fly around the country. And she tweets out a note to anyone who wants to use union members as a wedge to oppose Medicare for All, because remember this, like unions, they negotiate for healthcare or they provide healthcare through the unions. Different, depends on which sector you're in or what industry. And there's some talk of, trying to tell union members like, you're going to lose your Cadillac plan. But she makes the point, UAW has one of the best plans in the country, but management can still use it to hold workers hostage. Medicare for All puts power back in our hands. So she, as a labor leader, understands the genuine dynamic that's going on.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. Like, one more analogous example, when you give people who can't afford food money to spend on food, there have been studies about this, they buy more school supplies for their kids. Just things of that nature. It frees you up to work on other stuff.